And now on to our closing talk by Deborah Altenburg entitled The State of Funding for U.S. Higher Education, Science and Technology in a Time of Change. Debbie is the Vice President for Research Policy and Advocacy at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. She has considerable experience working at the confluence of higher education and the federal environment. Debbie is responsible for issues related to the federal research policy and funding advocacy. She leads the Office of Research Policy, as well as research policy work with the Office of Congressional and Governmental Affairs. As part of her work, she meets regularly with senior research officers, as well as with members of Congress, giving her insight into both worlds. With so much uncertainty in this current climate, Debbie is well positioned to provide us with an overview of the state of affairs regarding federal funding, as well as many other key issues impacting our community. I'm really grateful Debbie could be here today to come speak with us to share some of what she's observing and where things might go. I'm also looking forward to hearing your thoughts and questions after Debbie's presentation. Please join me in extending her a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for having me. And usually I try to start one of these talks with some levity because I often feel like Debbie Downer when I deliver news from D.C. So I've been thinking the last few days about if there are any good stories that I have about libraries. And I thought I might tell you about the time my brother won our local library's Pet Mouse raffle, the month that all the kids in the summer reading program read Beverly Cleary's Ralph and the Motorcycle Mouse. Or maybe one of my childhood friends, their parents recently downsized and they went to move all of the books and they found little cards in all of their books in their bookshelf because my childhood friend and I one summer decided we wanted to have our own library and we cataloged all the books in her house. But, maybe these are not the stories for this august audience. So like any good speaker these days, last night I asked AI to tell me a joke about librarians and it spit out a real knee slapper. So why did the librarian get kicked off the airplane? Because it was overbooked. So I've made you laugh, and now I can get serious. So I did want to start with just a little bit of overview. How many of you know what APLU is and what we do? Okay, a few of you. So that's a good slide. We are the oldest higher education association in the United States. Our founding is tied to the creation of the land-grant university system, which was really part of a design to help repair the nation after the Civil War through the creation of universities focused on educating the sons and daughters of farmers and laborers. Our members today include almost 250 public research universities in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Our members include both R1 and R2 institutions. And our association and its members collectively focus on three big themes: increasing student success and workforce readiness, promoting path-breaking scientific research, and bolstering economic and community engagement. My role at APLU is specifically, as Kate mentioned, to focus on research policy and funding. And my team, if you haven't met them today, Drs. Casey Red and Kevin Cook down here, we work most closely with our senior research officers at our institutions. I was looking back at a year in review of all the presentations I've given, and this year has certainly been a banner year for people who are considered Washington whisperers. But I want to appropriately set your expectations. I'll talk about what happened in 2025, what may still happen, and sort of my cloudy crystal ball for 2026. But if you came hoping that I'll provide a rational explanation of what's happening in D.C., I'm not sure that that's really in the cards, because what I think we are seeing really is a time of revolutionary change in what has been considered the traditional relationship between the federal government and institutions of higher education. So I started the year with a slide like this that had my little airplane of universities and really just it only had headwinds in the original slide. So at the beginning of the year, we were facing funding challenges. Congress had not yet finished the FY25 appropriations bills. Campuses were still dealing with the fallout from 2024 campus protests. And research security was really a major concern. But as the year has progressed, I've had to add more and more arrows to my slide because, higher education, I think now has being buffeted by both headwinds and tailwinds and updrafts and downdrafts, and really impacting every aspect of the operations of your campuses. And this overlaid with, I think, a philosophy coming from President Trump's administration of really focusing on a significantly smaller government. And they have used all of their authority that they can to eliminate grants and programs and really make many of the science agencies much smaller than they once were. And Congress has, been very tepid in any pushback. And so let's break down what Congress has done and what they may be doing. Because I think it's important for the background of what's going to happen at your institutions. So the big thing that Congress accomplished this year was the passage of the budget reconciliation bill, the one that everyone calls the One Big Beautiful Bill. And while many of the provisions in that bill have not yet come into effect, there are many parts of this bill that will impact higher education. And first up is loan limits for undergraduate and graduate students. And Congress really focused extensively on limiting lending for graduate students. So Graduate Plus loans were eliminated in this bill, and they created new limits. Now, the yearly limits for graduate students are relatively similar, but where the real change came in is with graduate student limits. And what they did is previously there were 3 different categories, 3 different funding levels. The bill reduced that to 2 levels, and both levels are significantly lower than existing loan limits. And then recently, the department went through a process called negotiated rulemaking to set the rules for what types of graduate students would receive this professional loan limit at the $200,000. And the list that they came up with, this is the list of what they decided were considered professional programs. Now, if your social media feed is anything like mine, the last few weeks have been full of nurses and other professionals being very upset that their careers have been labeled as having non-professional degrees. The department, I don't think the Department of Education was not necessarily ready for this kind of social media campaign. And they recently put out a fact sheet called Myth versus Fact, the Definition of Professional Degrees, in which they said that the fact sheet argued that the definition of professional degree was an internal definition used by the department to distinguish among programs that qualify for the higher loan limit, but that this had no bearing on whether or not a program is actually professional in nature. Now, this may be true, but these loan limits are going to have a significant impact on students and the decisions that they make and the access that they have to more favorable loan limits when they enroll in programs. So we may see significant changes to people's behavior and what programs that they choose to participate in, and how some students may be able to persist in these programs. So this will have an impact on university operations. This is coupled with one of the other big parts of the One Big Beautiful Bill, introduced a new idea around accountability on a program level that we have not seen at the federal level before. So the Education Department has not yet established the regulations that will govern this process, but one of the ways in which that they will look at accountability is that they will look at the income of graduates of individual programs on your campuses. And they will look at census tract data based on individuals in similar industries, and they will make income comparisons based on graduates of programs and people in those fields that have the next lower level of educational attainment. And if programs don't graduate students with higher incomes over 3-year periods, those programs could become ineligible for receiving federal financial aid for students in those programs. And so APLU has done at least some initial modeling of some of the factors that we think is going to go into these formulas. And unfortunately, what it looks like is that there are some traditionally, I think, underpaid professions. Think about K through 12 teachers, social workers, folks in the arts, that they may be caught in this formula that their graduates may not initially make as much as people who have a lower educational level in those industries, and this could be a problem for those programs. So we are going to be very, very closely watching how the department comes up with this formula, but campuses may choose to plan academic programs differently as the regulations become clearer. And in fact, we've already seen some schools really looking at a program-by-program level analysis of moving forward and what kind of course offerings will be available to students. And then the final word on the one big beautiful bill of things that I am worried about is that the bill put significant new responsibilities on state governments for Medicaid and SNAP food assistance benefits. So we will be watching closely as states start their budgeting processes about what the impact will be for public universities as states have to increase funding for these other programs. Will that potentially lead to cuts for public higher education? Now, we may not see the full impact of these cuts in 2026, but I think the states will start the budget tightening. And by 2027, there could be significant cuts to programs. And so we will be watching that pretty closely. So that is law. That is Congress has done. But what is Congress still yet to do? And I want to talk a little bit about what happened with the fiscal year 25. And Congress really abdicated its responsibilities and simply passed a continuing resolution for the whole year and what the impacts have been. Now, under normal circumstances, when Congress appropriates money through the appropriations process, Congress attaches what's called a binding funding table inside an appropriations bill and says the Department of Education can spend $10 million on this program and $10 million on program B and C. And the funding table is the part of the bill that delineates that funding. But in a continuing resolution, there's no funding table attached. It's just a very simple, 5-page bill that says you will continue to spend at levels that you spent in the previous fiscal year. And the Trump administration chose a unique new interpretation of this and said, well, there's no funding table, so I can spend the funding as I see fit. So the administration used this authority to consolidate and eliminate programs in the Department of Education and other agencies. So we've seen this happen at the Department of Ed. And then one of the other impacts that we have seen at other agencies that the New York Times recently did, I thought, a pretty good analysis about was they changed the the funding timelines for funding grants at the National Institutes of Health and the National Institutes of and the National Science Foundation. So they funded grants with larger upfront multi-year grants. And because they used this mechanism, it also decreased the total number of grants that the agencies were able to distribute. So I won't go through all of these, but I would encourage you to think about the impacts that this may have had on your campus. We've certainly had reports from a number of campuses that have seen a lower number of researchers that were funded in the last year, but with as higher multi-year grants. But the other thing that these multi-year grants did was they will also force institutions to spend the funding at a higher rate, because under previous rules, most folks could have no-cost extensions for a longer period of time. The Trump administration reinterpreted those rules and have limited those options on many grants. The other thing that we have unfortunately seen through these numbers is that there's been an unfortunate disparate impact on newer investigators. The NIH funded 1,300 fewer R01 research grants in 2025, and the National Science Foundation funded 536 fewer graduate student fellowships. So these are having, these decisions are having real impacts on your campuses. And many have questioned why Congress seemingly, gave up its power of the purse, and especially in light of the recent longest government shutdown on record. Sort of what is happening? Where is the leadership that Congress should have in protecting some of these programs? I don't want to be overly negative, because I do think that there is some silver lining. I think that some in Congress have recognized the challenge of having long-term continuing resolutions. And we've started to see some daylight, I think, between Congress and the administration moving forward in terms of appropriations. If you'll recall, at the beginning of the year, President Trump proposed significantly slashing many of the programs that APLU advocates for, including a 55% cut for the National Science Foundation and a 40% cut at the National Institutes of Health. But I think through the advocacy of the academic and research community, Congress has started to take steps down a different path for what we may be able to finish the FY26 bills. On a bipartisan basis, the Senate Appropriations Committee and the House Appropriations Committee have rejected many of the large cuts that the administration proposed. And I'm just going to give a couple of highlights. The House appropriation bills called for a 2% increase for the Department of Energy Office of Science. The Senate proposed almost level funding for the National Science Foundation. And they also put forth report language in their bill expressing support for STEM education programs that President Trump had proposed eliminating. And I think importantly for the National Institutes of Health, both the House and the Senate have put forth bills that would reject the president's plans to reorganize NIH and to slash its funding. And the Senate bill actually includes instructions to the NIH about limiting their ability to continue to use this multi-year funding mechanism that we saw them use in 2025. So I think that, our shared community voices were definitely heard on Capitol Hill with regards to the importance of these research agencies. And while we're still having challenges passing the FY26 bills, the Senate, I think, is still struggling. Late yesterday, I heard a bunch of rumors that we might possibly see some Senate action next week. As I said, I think there is a recognition that continuing to give the administration sort of a free pass and doing another continuing resolution is not in our best interests. So I am hoping that cooler heads prevail and we are able to finish the appropriations bills in January. The other topic that Congress is working on, and I know it's one that all of you have talked about today, I think, and overall we're watching very closely and has certainly taken over our lives at APLU, and that is facilities and administrative costs, F&A, or indirect costs. This year has really pushed APLU into new directions. For the first time in APLU's over 100-year history, along with our partner organizations, we have sued the federal government not once, but 4 times. The NIH, the Department of Energy, the NSF, and the DOD over proposals that they put forward to implement a flat 15% F&A rate. And thus far, we have been successful in court in maintaining the status quo. In the NIH case, the case has been heard on appeal in the First Circuit, and we are waiting for a decision. The DOD cases and the DOE cases are in different stages of the appeals process, and the government actually decided to drop its appeal in the NSF case. But I think the important thing to remember about these cases is that the status quo was not really ever a long-term solution. There has been bipartisan concerns for years about the transparency of F&A, and there have been multiple attempts to change the system through a variety of cap proposals in Congress. And additionally, one of the challenges of the litigation is that the Office of Management and Budget in the White House continues to have the authority to change uniform guidance that governs agency grant makers and the rate negotiations, and we know that they plan to do so. So earlier this year, APLU joined with 10 other associations to create the Joint Association Group on Indirect Costs. We recruited subject matter experts, and the group was chaired by former OSTP Director Calvin Drogemeyer. Earlier this summer, we introduced the new proposal called the FAIR model. The FAIR model is designed to bring more transparency and accountability to the process by tying reimbursement to actual project needs. Hopefully, some of you have participated in some of the webinars that JAG sponsored earlier this year. I think there was also a session on F&A earlier today. So I did bring some slides explaining the FAIR model. I don't know how many of you need this explanation, but I'll go through these quickly. So as we have explained, we are trying to change the nomenclature so that you won't use direct costs and indirect costs, but we're talking about research performance costs and then categories of essential research performance support. So those research performance costs are similar to what direct costs are today, but then these essential research supports broken down into 4 categories: and regulatory costs, award monitoring and oversight and reporting, research information services, and essential research performance facilities. I'm not going to read all of these definitions, but we can talk about them later if you have questions. And then this last category, we're designed to talk about the general research operations. So really, the JAG subject matter expert group came away after looking at numerous university and hospital and others and the way that F&A is used, that there is still this set of costs that are very hard to tie to an individual project. And so they determined that it's really about 15% of those costs these are designed around procurement and materials and human resources on campuses. And so they determined that would be about 15%. The other thing that the FAIR model thought really hard about is that not every institution has the same robust accounting systems or research portfolio. And so the proposal included what we called an expanded option or a base option, sort of an easy form, in which institutions might only account for about 10% of the budget for some of the things that sort of larger institutions may be able to better align those costs. This is really, really basic. I know you probably have lots of questions, but I just wanted to give you that brief overview, because I think the important part is where we are in sort of advocacy for this new model. I think we've seen a lot of support on Capitol Hill since the FAIR model was introduced this summer. We have been successful in securing language in 9 bills across the House and the Senate that would, to varying degrees, would direct federal agencies to continue to use the current F&A system until the administration works with the academic community to develop a consensus proposal. The language in the Senate bill that would fund the National Institutes of Health specifically names the JAG model as the preferred outcome. The House and the Senate recently came to agreement on the FY26 National Defense Authorization Act, which is the act that governs DoD policy each year. And that bill does contain a prohibition on the Department of Defense from moving forward with a new F&A policy unless the agency can certify to Congress that they've worked with the academic community on an alternative model. Additionally, we continue to work closely with both Senate Appropriations Chair Susan Collins and House Appropriations Chair Tom Cole to further refine language and to give more explicit instructions about implementing the FAIR model. I was just on a number of conference calls this morning. Senator Collins is very engaged and thinking about how best to strategize to apply the FAIR model across the federal agencies. So we will continue to work with both of those leaders and continue to be hopeful that we can have a unifying message from Congress to the administration that we need a model that fundamentally does cover the costs of doing research, and that includes all of the costs that go along with data repositories and publications and all of the things that I know this audience cares about. And that unifying message from Congress is important because we know that the Office of Management and Budget is working on their own proposal. APLU's president met with OMB before the government shut down earlier this fall. And at the time, they indicated that their proposal, they are still working on their proposal, it would cap indirect costs at 15% of total direct costs, but that they would likely consider new definitions of what a direct and an indirect cost were. They also indicated that they plan to have their policy only looking forward, so existing grants would operate under existing rules, and that they would make their proposal available and open to public comment for up to 30 days. I think that reading between the lines, and that's probably why you asked me to come and speak of what I think that this will look like, I think that they think that it will be very easy to redefine indirects and directs, that they're going to move. There are a number of things that they recognize have to be paid for, but they want to pay for them in the direct cost category. They will narrow the scope of what's indirect and have that 15% cap. And then they will have a new category of things that they no longer think the federal government should pay for with research funding. What I'm worried about for this community is in that third new category, They have asked a lot of questions to institutions that have gone in to meet with OMB about why we should pay for publication costs, why we should pay for library services, why we should pay for buildings. I think that if their overall thought is that they think that limiting indirects is somehow going to help combat what they see as administrative bloat on campuses. They also think that the current system encourages universities to overbuild and that universities specifically build new research buildings to increase their F&A rate. It sort of makes sense that they need to figure out ways to cut things that they no longer think effectuate good research, and that could be a problem. So what I want to say to you is that I think once OMB opens their proposal for this public comment, that will be the stage at which I hope this community certainly speaks with a voice and responds to that period for public comment. I know APLU will be working to provide resources for our members. So making sure that your institutions also respond on this issue, especially if they do leave out all of these category of data management and library services in the OMB's proposal. So this is the time when all of us will have to work together. The other question I get a lot is sort of what happens now if Congress acts or OMB acts first, and sort of who wins in that dance. Ultimately, Congress has the power of the purse, and that is what we need. We need that strong message from Congress. So if OMB comes out with their proposal and Congress can come in with an appropriations bill and says OMB is not allowed to implement it, they are not allowed to use any funds to implement this, that is what we will be advocating for, and I hope that all of you will be part of that. So that was a lot on F&A. I'm sure I can take other questions. I want to focus next on sort of what's coming next. And I only have a few slides here of sort of big policy issues that I will be watching and our association will be watching in 2026. I think that you can't do a presentation about what's happening in higher education policy without talking about the Trump administration's proposal earlier this fall that was sent to a select group of institutions asking them to sign a compact with the federal government. And the compact called for universities to commit to certain policies, including banning the consideration of race or sex in hiring and hiring and admissions, to freeze tuition for 5 years, to limit international undergraduate enrollment to 15% of the student body, to commit to institutional neutrality, to require applicants to take standardized tests such as the SAT and the ACT, to clamp down on grade inflation, to restrict employees from expressing political views on behalf of the institution, and to shut down departments that punish, belittle, or spark violence against conservative ideas, among other provisions. The Trump administration claimed in a cover letter to the compact that was sent to those select institutions that if they signed the compact, that the institution could be eligible for benefits, including increased indirect cost reimbursement, possibly approval of student visas, and other preferential treatment potentially under the tax code. I think the administration was a little bit surprised at the pushback that they received from many of the initial campuses. Most of them declined to sign the compact, but I don't think any of the policy goals of the administration has changed. So we fully expect this to come back in some way in 2026, and there are at least a few institutions that have showed a willingness to work with the administration on some sort of modified compact. So it is something that we are watching closely. The other thing that we're watching closely is generally executive orders. The administration's increased use of executive orders is definitely an interesting trend that I think scholars will be studying for many years. President Trump has issued 218 executive orders so far. This is the highest number of first-year executive orders since FDR, who issued 568 executive orders in 1933 when the U.S. was facing the height of unemployment during the Great Depression. And while executive orders are not supposed to change laws, the administration is certainly using them to change interpretation and practice. Many of the EOs this year have impacted higher education, including those related to immigration, sports participation, AI, and several others. We have been watching as agencies have started to put into place new regulations related to the EO on grant making, federal grant making, which was issued in August. So this EO laid out several new interpretations for federal agencies on how they will solicit, review, monitor grant applications and awards. And agencies are starting to operationalize this guidance. If you recently read the NIH's announcement of its unified funding strategy a few weeks ago, one of the things that memo says is that they are eliminating the reliance of pay lines on award decisions. And while peer review will remain an important factor in awarding funds, there will also be other considerations taken into account, including alignment with the NIH mission, broader distribution across investigators, and broader geographic distribution of funding. And so we have been sort of wondering if what the agencies are talking about there is potentially limiting the number of grants that an individual investigator can receive, or possibly limiting the number of grants that an institution can receive in order to distribute more grants across multiple states. I have heard that an NSF is also preparing to change its peer review guidelines. So this executive order is propagating throughout. We've also seen agencies like the NIH that have already changed grants and conditions to specifically allow for the termination of grants that no longer effectuate the program goals or agency priorities. So this is a significant departure from previous practice. The other EO that I was thinking about with this audience is specifically related to the EO on what they called gold standard science. And here I just put the definition of what they said gold standard science was in the executive order. I think there's a lot here that we all agree with, but it really remains to be seen in practice how this will be applied. Agencies have published plans, but I'm particularly worried that at some point we are going to reach a stage in which an agency considers a grant application and potentially says, we don't think that this practice is gold standard science. So what is not gold standard science? The opposite of what the definition is what I'm worried about, and we'll be watching closely. And then my last slide, just regarding AI and the fever pitch that DC definitely, everyone has an opinion. Every member of Congress wants to talk about AI and how they think it's going to change the world. But in just thinking about the academic enterprise, so just yesterday, President Trump signed an executive order that's designed to discourage states from passing any AI regulations on their own. It calls on the Department of Justice to start an AI litigation task force to challenge existing state laws. and calls on other federal agencies to consider withholding discretionary grants to those states if states have enacted AI regulations. The preemption of state law is an interesting legal thicket, and so we will have to see how far the administration takes it. On a more positive note, we did see on November 24th, the Trump administration sign an executive order launching the Genesis mission, which is a national effort to advance scientific discovery and technological innovation using artificial intelligence. The Department of Energy will be the leader of this new initiative, and the way they have described it is that they want to double the productivity and impact of American science and engineering within a decade. I've been a little worried about the rhetoric around the Project Genesis. I think everyone is excited about the mission, and the DOE has said that they plan to identify at least 20 science and technology challenges in the areas of advanced manufacturing, biotechnology, critical materials, nuclear fission, fusion energy, quantum information science, semiconductors, and microelectronics. That all sounds great, but they haven't really described, A, where the money is going to come from, and B, the mention of universities was in very small print in all of the press releases. And they've really taken a view that the national labs and industries are the leaders here. And where universities may fall in that priority and cooperation, I think they recognize that universities are an important tenant. But where that happens with research, they seem very focused on universities educating the AI-ready workforce, but where is the investment that universities will need? I know your institutions are thinking about AI on a large enterprise scale and what it does to both operations and educational programming, what it does to research, and how we as a community talk about the changes to our legislators, to our students, to our staff, and to the general public is going to be very, very important. How do we balance the needed investments with finite resources? So I've talked for a long time. I want to close sort of just with reflecting on some of what I had to say at the beginning about the founding of land-grant universities. The founding of land-grant universities to heal the nation and support a new generation of workers. Our institutions, land-grant or not, are in a similar role today. We have so much civil discourse that is negative, but where the healing of our nation will happen is in your classrooms with your students, and how we react in this moment of change is really going to define what our next chapter looks like. How do we re-engage political leaders? How do we re-engage the public in trusting our institutions? How do we continue to talk to our communities about the benefits, how our universities improve lives, serve society, both locally, regionally, nationally, and globally? These are the messages that all of us have to share. And I think that organizations like APLU and CNI and disciplinary societies, our institutions, we all really need to work to make that happen in this moment. So I'm happy to take questions, and thank you so much for having me.
Hi there, I'm Hillary Craiglow with Attain Partners. Thank you for coming and sharing this with us and for your advocacy work. You shared with us some expectations about what you think is going to come out of the OMB. You had a slide about that and implied that we should be prepared for a relatively short comment period. For us to prepare for that and to have intelligent conversations on our campus, can you expand on that? Your understanding of how library may be treated in an OMB 15% flat rate? Are we talking about exclusions of library services or resources or buildings? Do you have any more insights or details on that?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think OMB has been a little tight-lipped with the community about what it will look like. But I'm taking that interpretation from questions that they have asked for those who have met with OMB. Unfortunately, I think there is I don't know, I can't think of the right analogy, but like AI and the internet, there's really like a simplified version of like, well, all the information is available and we are making everyone make all their data available immediately. So why do we need to pay for publication costs, and why do we have to pay for libraries? So they look at the list of things that are in indirect cost negotiations and have started to tick things off and ask questions about why. So that's what I'm worried about. That's what I will be watching for, but I don't have more details as of yet.
Hello. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was comprehensive, it was understandable and accessible, and I appreciate that. One of the things I'm David Pavlich. I'm from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. One of the things that I'm kind of curious about is where the ideology is coming from, because we often use the shorthand of saying Trump did this or Trump did that. But anyone who works in a hierarchy knows that a lot of these ideas come from elsewhere in the hierarchy. And so I'm curious about, who is really drafting the policy, who is really drafting the ideology. If you're comfortable, sharing that information, I'd be really curious to know. Thanks.
I certainly do agree with some of the analysis. If you read Project 2024, many of these ideas, including ideas about indirect costs, were in that writing. There are some other sort of right-leaning think tanks that also I think have the ear of some of the folks in the administration. And then I would encourage folks, there was a daily that got shared pretty widely in policy circles. The New York Times, the podcast about the OMB director and some of his sort of personal experience and all of the writing that he personally did between the first and the second Trump administration. So those are those are the thoughts I have immediately in thinking about what you asked. I would also say one of the things in that EO on grant making, if you didn't read it, it does lay out a desire in the future for agencies to not just rely on peer review, but specifically allow for political appointees within the federal agencies to have more oversight of grant making. So that is interesting in that many of the federal science agencies have previously not had as many political appointees as potentially we may see in the future.
Hi, Emily Bonney from Cal State Fullerton. You spoke repeatedly about how the Department of Education is going to be a part of implementing all of this. At the same time, there is the stated intention of getting rid of the Department of Education. So how do you think this all plays out?
As I said at the beginning, if you were hoping for rationality, I'm not sure I have rationality for you. So yes, there is this extreme dichotomy that the administration has said that they would like to shut the Department of Education, but Congress has given a great new deal of authority. And even yesterday, the House Education Committee had some new bills that would give even more authorities to the Department of Education. So, we have seen the Department of Education sign memorandums with several other agencies to potentially do the work. And so whether it's the department decides we will establish what the policies should be, and then we will ask other agencies to enforce it, that's certainly a pathway that they could choose.
if they still exist?
Hi, Greg Ritter from Amazon Web Services. First, I want to echo our colleague from Wisconsin's. I found this very informative and accessible and important. So thank you for that. I think I've come away more informed. I'm not sure I've come away more happy.
My Debbie Downer.
I'm hoping to give you an opportunity to think beyond the current administration. And what I'd like to hear is your perspective on what the long-term impact of these changes in this administration might be. Hopefully, we are still in a country where this administration will not always be the administration. And so if we look 8 years, 12 years, 16 years down the road, what is the opportunity for either rolling back some of this or what is the ongoing impact that this is going to have on the community?
I don't want to leave you with the impression that there are no areas of, potentially working together, or that there are no ideas within this administration that our community should be working with them on. I certainly think, right, they have made it very clear that AI is one of their big priorities. This is a big priority within this room as well. So, I mean, this is an area that we all have to work together. AI and the technological developments are not going to necessarily be stalled because of here. So it's definitely an area that we all need to work together on. I also think that some of the desires of the Trump administration around reducing regulatory burden is something that our community should be thinking about. There are plenty of federal regulations on universities that could be simplified, and we want to be part of that conversation. So the Trump administration had a request for information earlier this year. I know APLU responded, several other associations responded. So there's areas. The Congress, we just had the National Commission on Advancing Biotechnology just came out with their final report. They are recommending a $15 billion investment in biotechnology. So I think that there are maybe big areas that we have disagreement on, but we have to focus on some of those areas where we do have agreement. And I think that there are changes coming to higher education generally that we can't put the sort of genie back in the bottle, right? I think there are lots of efforts to think about a 3-year undergraduate degree. There are efforts to think about, is our time to degree in graduate programs, is it too long? Right. So I think we have to look for those opportunities while we're also, having all of these other battles. So I hope that we can focus on some of those and not necessarily all of the negatives, although I felt like I had to report out to everyone, since you're in D.C., what was going on.
Nathan Tallman, AP Trust, thank you for your talk today. My question verges on asking you to explain the irrational, but there are things like the Nelson memo that adds all these compliance options to universities dealing with federally funded research. There's prior ones, and there's some similarity also with the Title II changes for ADA. The government is adding all of these new things that must be done, but on the other hand, they're taking away the funding mechanism to make that happen. Do you think there could be a scale back or withdrawal of some of that previous guidance, like the Nelson memo, as a response to that? Or are they just going to deal with the irrationality and let it be there? Thank you.
Sure. So I did hear a rumor that perhaps the Department of Justice is thinking about some sort of request for the community and thinking about the ADA compliance rules and whether or not there are ways in which to save money, or so we're watching. I haven't heard if it's coming soon, or I think the government shutdown did really delay a lot of things. OMB told me that they really did stop working on their F&A proposal for 40 days during the shutdown. So we will have to see. I think that the confluence of the Nelson memo and public access and AI, like there's a struggle here that I don't think that they have wanted to talk about as of yet.
Hi, Yasmin Shorish from James Madison University. I have a kind of zoomed out question about what APLU might be looking at when we think about some of the funding decisions that have been made with taking funding, for example, from HSIs and diverting it to HBCUs, and then this degree kind of funding allowed for degrees depending on how the salaries shake out, and those salaries are in professions that are generally feminized professions, and therefore could have a deleterious effect on women going into college and into these professions. Is APLU keeping an eye on what looks to be a potential outcome of resegregation of higher education, and also, kind of discouraging women from seeking higher education?
It's an interesting question. I hadn't necessarily thought about it. I mean, we do know statistically right now, there are more women as undergraduates in most of our institutions. So it's an interesting way you put it. I can take it back to our team. All right. I know you're all tired. You had a busy several days. Well, I thank you very much. You all can contact me if you have further questions, and I appreciate your attention.